or formally, product design is a new discipline for Ripple. And the reason for that is because RippleNet has started out as just a set of backend APIs that integrates with our financial institution customers. And so their user experience for our enterprise users is actually, in some ways, often out of our control. However, Antonio and I have been working on starting a new team, which is working on a user experience or user interface that's a way of accessing RippleNet. We're working on a product that supports highly complex processes. So not only payment operations processes for enterprise users, but also business, legal, and integration processes. So, oh dear. Come back. There you go. Just touchy, I guess. So this process map was actually the end-to-end business process flow for all of Ripple. Actually, any process flows you see today are actually like really simplified versions of the complexity that exists underneath. And this experience of like mapping out what this kind of end-to-end business process looked like was very illuminating for a lot of reasons. Basically, when I joined, there was kind of this task that was given to me, here's a bunch of business process flows, map out to end-to-end customer journey. And I was like, well, this isn't really the customer journey, this is our business process. So I had to make that very clear, that the business process is different than the customer journey. But a very illuminating process. The top is kind of all of the business processes at Ripple. And the bottom is kind of like the different touch points for our customers. So a complex process, a system of separate series of events or relationships which somehow relate to each other and create a larger whole. So how many people here have either built, designed, or managed products, that are for processes that would fit this definition? Okay, so a lot of people. And probably a lot of them in specialized domains as well. So both Antonio and I have worked in different domains that are full of complex processes. So I actually started my career in a construction company in the marketing department. And I actually learned very quickly that I'm very fascinated by just complex processes and how things are built. And construction there's just so many different moving pieces and parts and things to manage. And then I went on to design construction software, actually, ERP software. And then later in my career, I'd had a little bit of a hiatus into something that was a lot less complex, and I got bored very quickly. And so then I went into manufacturing analytics, specifically on a plant production floor. Antonio has, I have not worked in finance before Ripple, but Antonio has, and he'll tell you about it.
Yeah, I have. I've worked in a couple of the more, I think, different industries, being finance and film. Similarities here is that they both have a lot of just inherent complexity, moving pieces. The other big part is that there are natural incentives for the systems to stay the way they are. So there's a lot of people who make money and find success. An example in the film industry is actual distribution. So when I started working in the film industry, the people who make the most money are oftentimes the distributors. They're the people who are the least in creative involvement, and they go at the end of so the risk-reward thing is always in a balance. And every single time, I think, as everybody mentioned before, when you have this balance between there is a process for how films are made, but there is creativity that flows within that. And that's one of, I think, the main challenges and what I found exciting in my career is being able to say, how can we understand what the complexities are within these systems and then find the creative solutions for them?
For sure, and I will say I really enjoy working with Antonio because he really embodies what I would call a T-shape engineering leader, very multidisciplinary, and held many different kinds of roles in his career. So we collaborate together not only in designing based on requirements that are handed us, but really like pushing against the edges of things to really figure out where the design innovation lies and engineering innovation as well.
Oh, great. So I'll take you through, I think, as Jackie mentioned before, there's a difference between Ripple and RippleNet. So RippleNet is the product that the Ripple team is building. So for anybody who doesn't know, and this diagram is not completely clear, RippleNet is a financial global network. The specific challenge and problem set that we're trying to solve is cross-border payments. So has anybody tried to ever send money overseas? I mean, yeah, it's something that, for those of you who haven't, it is expensive, it is slow, and the user experience, I don't even know if this exists as far as the user experience, if you could call it that. So one of the things that Ripple's really trying to solve those three problems and those three vectors, which is that by lowering the actual reliability, or increasing the reliability and lowering their error rate, if you understood how, this is one of the things that shocked me, was that apparently 6 transactions out of 100 in international transfers fail, 6 out of 100, which is, if you think about like your credit card working 6 out of 100, failing 6 out of 100 times, not what you'd expect out of a financial institution, but that's actually what happens. So that leads to, why is this expensive and why is it slow? That's really the reason. So what Ripple does is we actually work with, not against, we work with local regulators. We work with these legacy systems to understand what is inherent in these complexities, to utilize those existing rails that we have. And that's what a lot of our partners do. So we have the sending side, receiving side, both of it. The main part of what we do is actually integrate with a lot of these complex legacy systems, which is something that I think everybody's discussed.
Yeah, and to speak that a little bit, when I arrived at Ripple, it was kind of a bit confusing when people talked about the customer, because it could kind of mean like one or three things, like customer being the buyer or the decision maker, the financial institution that and its team, or it could be the person actually like using our product. So kind of like we build a system that enables better experience for consumers by changing the industry and the infrastructure that supports that. So that's been really fascinating for me because of the different kind of, not only different sides of the network, sender and receiver, but also the enterprise side and the way that affects the consumer experience.
So the main case study that we wanted to talk out of the bunch of the different complexities, the main one that we work on is lowering the bar of entry for our customers. It's one of the things that is the most challenging, and obviously for a business, you want to be able to onboard customers that have a desire to actually use your product, move them to actually using the product as quickly as you can. If anybody's worked with financial institutions, this is not fast nor easy. There's a lot of parties that is required. So there's inherent complexities in this system, but within that is where the challenges I find of working with UX, working with engineering to see how can we identify and solve these problems. Again, lowering this bar so we can work, how can we integrate with these existing systems? Where do we need to push back and innovate new ones?
So getting back to this map, so the actual integration and setup with our financial institution customers is like in this section here of the map, but the goal eventually will be to make this whole process, a business process of getting our customers on RippleNet completely self-service through a product. So it's a really big mandate. Currently we have a pretty large customer success team that includes project managers, integration engineers, solution architects. If anybody's worked at like enterprise software company, that's pretty complex integration. You know that every customer requires a project to get started or some sort of consulting services. Formerly, I worked on an analytics product that often required a lot of upfront data prep and configuration. So this is a common thing that we find in enterprise software, but obviously, in order to scale, we need to start to productize these things. So it's pretty clear from this map that this end-to-end process is very complex, but want to go into some of the things that you don't see on this map that make it particularly complex. So one is there's multiple kind of user journeys and levels of engagement along the way. So especially with our large bank customers, we could potentially start with a certain set of people that we're working with, like a team that is working to integrate the software, and then that team could like turn over and we could end up with a different team, or we have a business lead who might come in at the beginning and then completely go MIA and be disengaged and then come in again at the end. So there's different kind of levels of engagement and places that these users come in and out of the process. So that's one area that, how do you design for a product for a process where the user is going to potentially change throughout the journey. Also, there's concurrent business and technical activities that can sometimes happen in parallel with different teams, but have dependencies among those teams. For example, sometimes our sender and receiver parties will spend a long time negotiating terms in which they're going to exchange money. And in the meantime, the tech teams are getting up and going, but obviously those two processes need to come together so they can understand that middle layer where the business requirements meet the technical implementation. As I mentioned, collaboration, and not only between sender and receiver parties, but also within business and technical teams, both within these institutions and across these institutions. And that doesn't include a lot of heavy collaboration between Ripple employees and our customers. There's also a lot of pre-existing rules that need to be followed, so a lot of standards we have to adhere to that build in more inherent complexity into the system, and it's part of the reason it's so difficult to transfer money today. But we, are actually slowly but surely molding those standards. So we wanted to share with you a few ways in which we have worked to try to envision a more simplified process for this particular problem. So Antonio brought up this quote this week, which I also really liked. For every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So we definitely, self-service onboarding, self-service setup has been kind of this rally cry from some of the, folks in our organization. And I think, there really is no silver bullet for this, and so it's kind of like been trying to, I think Antonio and I are trying to manage expectations about what is possible to do from a product standpoint. And
I think as engineers, there's a tendency to try to consistently oversimplify, and then also to jump to solutions before you fully understand the problem. And again, these financial processes that exist, they've existed for a long time, and there's good reasons for some of them, there isn't for others. That's what a lot of the challenge that we've been facing is when to simplify, when to look for those answers, when to lean on our subject matter experts to realize that sometimes there isn't a really easy solution for these problems.
And yeah, like Antonio said, just as a designer, really dwelling in that problem space, dig deep, marinate, dig deep again.
Yep.
And to that, I think something that I learned coming into Ripple, especially product design being a new function. I didn't really have a lot of user research resources, for example. I was kind of like, I was the only product designer at all for a while. So I think instead of, sometimes designers and researchers, we think of like user knowledge as our superpower. It's like, oh, if we have this insight about how the user does this task, then that'll be able to help us influence change. But I think also creative ignorance can be a superpower, just to be able to ask your teammates questions and help them get on board by being super humble and super curious. And then second to that is being helpful to these internal subject matter experts. In any complex process, complex domain, you're going to have subject matter experts. The goal is to really build a win-win relationship with them, where they feel like you're on their team, supporting them in their jobs, and eventually going to be making their lives easier. And then lastly, when you have a long, complex process and there's a lot of internal processes, the user or customer voice can sometimes get lost in that process. So you can continue to, or work with actually customer success teams to bring that to the surface and make sure that it's coming through, even with all of these different activities going on. These are a few ways that we've been working to try to mold this complex process. One is making sure to get multiple customer-facing perspectives. So you can't just go to sales and get their perspective on how things could change. You can't just go to technical service. You have to actually go to each team and understand their view of the world. And that's the only way you can really start to understand how to change the process, because that's how the efficiencies are created, by breaking down these silos. So this can apply to a lot of different activities. For task analysis, it's tempting as a designer and to look at it kind of like architecture and look at the big picture and then start to drill into the details. But innovation can actually be lost that way. Sometimes you can actually get into the details, get very messy, start to kind of build up a process that is actually more simple. So I actually recommend both approaches. There's a place for either. As I mentioned, business process and user experience, and the way that the user experiences that business process are two different things and should be defined differently, but they're both important. I think you can't just look at the user journey, you also have to look at how the business process affects that user journey. So that includes what are users feeling, doing, and thinking. And this is our business users. Currently we have a set of business and technical teams, a lot of technical folks often working on system integration. We know that in the future, we want to make this process so simple that our business users can set up and get going on RippleNet. And in fact, one of the projects that I took on was making a future vision video that was more of a marketing video of what this ultimate experience could look like if the business user can do everything end to end. So that was kind of like an aligning force, and we know this is the future, and we know that that the industry is actually going to be changed and transformed if we're able to do this for this particular user. But you can't just dwell in the future. You have to actually look at what's happening on the ground now and try to mold it. It's not an overnight thing. It's just a very slow process. So to sum this up, problems of this type of complexity, they require brain power from multiple different disciplines. And I think that's what I enjoy about working at Ripple and working on this product so much, is you have to collaborate so heavily with so many different people in order to solve this problem that we're working on. And Antonio is going to speak to more about that.
So, I mean, one of the processes that we've at least tried to follow within our working group, kind of this three-step approach. So simplify. So I guess what does that mean? For us, simplify means working with the subject matter experts to actually unlock what steps of the process need changing. So one example is we had 5 different steps that all took, let's say, a month. One of them was contract negotiation. And I think as an engineer, you see, okay, contract, what's the solution I can have for contract? You're like, DocuSign, right? I want to actually manage the signing of the contracts. Digging into this a lot deeper with our subject matter experts, they're like, no, that's not the part of the contract that's hard. That's not unuseful, but where the time actually comes is doing service level agreements between the two. And it's like just understanding and using the subject matter experts that we have at our disposal. And most companies have a lot of these individual knowledge centers that have a really strong desire to be heard. As an engineering, as a UX team, our job is to be able to help unify them and bring their voices to be able to unlock these complex problems. The automation part is another thing that I think, again, engineers feel really, really good at this. The problem and challenge that we have with this is what is the maximum impact? What are the pieces that we need? So it's not just the premature optimization problem, but making sure that all of the pieces that we're trying to solve in this add up towards a global success. And then the transformative part out of all of this is, working with the existing business processes, working with the existing people that actually do these jobs. I think that not only can you unlock each part of this, but again, you have to make sure that you're encouraging, incentivizing behavior in a positive way for change. And without really getting into the mind space of each one of these people, you can try to make the process in general simpler, but you actually don't solve the problem. And I think that, as we saw, 66% of products don't succeed. This is one of the reasons why. It's because you have individual successes, you're individually optimizing pieces. You don't have a transformative encouragement of behavior. You're either ignoring it or you're just glossing over it.